The College of Arts and Sciences at Stony Brook University presents The Difference You Make, where we hear weekly from people who make a difference in our world. Here now, the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences and Professor of History, our host, David Wrobel.
Hello, my name is David Wrobel, Dean and Professor of History in the College of Arts and Sciences at Stony Brook University. On today's episode of The Difference You Make, The Ideas That Matter, I'm joined by Nancy Hiemstra, Associate Professor in the Department of Women's, Gender and Sexuality Studies. Nancy's a political, cultural and feminist geographer with interests including global migration, immigration, enforcement policies, detention and deportation, homeland security, borders, gender, race, Latin America and feminist epistemology and methodologies. Her research examines how state politics shape patterns and consequences of human mobility with a focus on restrictive border and immigration policies. Incredibly pertinent topics for the present day, to be sure. And this summer, Nancy's latest book, Detention Inc, The Big Business of Locking Up Migrants, co-written with Dr. Deirdre Conian, investigates the internal economies of detention facilities in the greater New York City area. That book was published this summer, and Nancy Hiemstra, we are delighted to have you on The Difference You Make. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much, and I'm honored to be here.
Oh, thank you. Let's jump straight in to the book. The premise of the book is to show how development of financial dependencies on detention contributes to the continued expansion of detention regimes around the U.S. and globally. And what I'd like to do is just sort of throw one more thing into the mix, and that's that larger context of mass incarceration in the United States. And a historian colleague about 15 years ago wrote an article called Why Mass Incarceration Matters, and that article focused on three major areas: the impact on urban communities of people being taken out of those communities, the impact on the American labor system of products being produced by prison labor and impacting the labor economy more broadly and the labor movement, and then the impact on party politics, the sort of changes in representation, how that impacts parties differently. But the real key to the article, I think, was something that's reflected in your work as well, and that's that this is a longer movement, and both political parties have invested in this. This is not a sort of Democratic Party has one view on things, Republican Party has another. I know there was a lot of focus in that article, and it's by Heather Ann Thompson, Why Mass Incarceration Matters. A lot of emphasis on how the Clinton administration took up that call for law and order, 100,000 new police on the streets, and that led to an uptick in the scale of mass incarceration in the United States. So can we start with mass incarceration and mass detention and how these maybe fit together?
Yeah, absolutely. The immigration detention system and industry and financial dependencies around immigration detention really are part of the larger carceral system and all the financial dependencies related to that. I mean, I think it's accurate to say, and we talk about this in the book, that immigration detention is an outgrowth of the incarceration industry. Detention really started taking off in the late 1980s and early 1990s when the United States carceral system kind of reached some of its peak numbers. And after growing steadily for decades, suddenly the incarceration industry was like, wow, well, we can't, we're having a hard time thinking of new laws to push for, to pull more people into the carceral system. How do we keep growing? And immigration detention was an area that they really started to push for. So we see, starting in the 1980s, a shift in factors and thinking around immigration detention to lead to the gradual kind of now seemingly unstoppable buildup in detention.
That's really helpful as we think through this, the idea of a scale that sort of perpetuates. And part of that scaling up is the privatization piece,
Absolutely.
right? So could you talk a little bit about, state and or federal government investments in these processes, and then the private sort of investment in the business of incarceration and detention? And one of the, I think, most pertinent things about your new book is its emphasis on this region, on the New York City metro region, as a place of immigration detention, which sort of cuts against the accepted sort of notion that this is something that happens on the borders.
Right.
It's not
Right.
something that happens in New York City.
Right. Well, just to state, I mean, there are over 200 detention facilities all over the United States, right? This is absolutely, as you said, not just a border thing. And we have seen increasingly in the last 4 decades, private companies as well as many state and local governments around the country becoming increasingly dependent on immigration detention. So money paid by the federal government to them, a daily per bed rate, just like with prisons, to house immigrant detainees. And, this really started growing with the involvement of private companies. So companies today, they previously had other names, but Core Civic, Geo Group were among the leaders then and still are now in terms of pushing for laws, meaning that detention has become increasingly considered the norm. It didn't used to be. It wasn't considered like, okay, we have an undocumented immigrant here, we're trying to deport them, we should put them in detention. That was not the case. We did not used to detain people considered vulnerable immigrants, such as women and children and asylum seekers. Those used to kind of be considered off limit. And today it's become fairly normal to think that, okay, all of these people have to be detained, right? And that's certainly the way things are now. And kind of that shift in thinking over the decades was really propelled, especially initially, by privatization, by the sense that we need this detention space, and look, there's all these private companies available to do it. And that was this thinking that was really cultivated by private companies. And that has been accompanied by the involvement for profit of a lot of state and local governments. So the idea that, for example, county jails can rent out extra space or perhaps build dedicated detention facilities that they then contract with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, to detain people on behalf of ICE, and they create for themselves a steady income. That's the goal. It does not always pan out that way.
Yeah.
And, in the book, we talk about how the increasing involvement of a wider web of companies, so not just companies directly involved in incarceration, but also companies that provide food, that provide medical care, that provide commissaries, that provide security and transportation and communication. The list goes on. So we see the involvement of more and more companies that have a stake in detention and stand to profit and grow themselves with an increase in detention capacity.
Yeah, I recall in the literature on mass incarceration, the incentives for privatization and how communities would often buy in with an expectation that, look, this is going to bring a certain amount of jobs and economic resources to a particular community. And we saw some communities where, the basic economic infrastructure that had driven that place had since gone away and now turning to carceral facilities. Is it the same with immigration detention?
Exactly the same.
Yeah.
I mean, really very, very much the same process. In the counties that we looked at in New Jersey and New York that had detention facilities, immigration detention came to be seen as a very important keystone of those counties or sheriff office budgets. And so in New Jersey, we looked at 3 counties in New Jersey, Bergen, Hudson, and Essex counties, that these were all democratically led counties, Democratic leaning and voting counties that had these facilities. And when there was growing activism in these counties to get ICE out of their county facilities, the county leaders, their narrative was very much like, look, we really need this money. If we get rid of these contracts, we're going to be hurting our own people. We're going to have to cut city services. You all are going to have to pay more taxes. And so that was kind of this constant narrative of like, well, we don't love having these facilities here, but somebody's got to do it, so it might as well be us. And that is that's the narrative that we're really seeing in many places around the country. You also see places that are very eager to take place in the larger deportation plan. But you also are hearing that narrative even from counties that are not excited about detaining and deporting a lot of people, that like, well, if it's going to have to happen, it might as well be us. And then drawing for a lot of people on that narrative of immigrant criminality and the idea that all these people, if they aren't documented, are criminal, illegal aliens. Those forces really just give a lot of license to private companies to go in and make deals with counties, with different facilities to get detention operations there.
That's really helpful for trying to think through this dilemma. So if mass incarceration, whether it's private corporations or city and state government entities that are buying into a process and sort of self-perpetuating on the sort of larger scale of mass incarceration, the perpetuation of the system is the key to the profit. So that means parole boards, perhaps less likely to grant parole because it would be undercutting a revenue source to do so. What's the equivalent with deportation, where there's a lot of rhetoric about instead of detention, let's deport? Wouldn't deportation undercut an economic system that's being crafted?
Well, what you're pointing out there, that possible kind of paradox, is something that makes me really fearful for the way that laws and who is being targeted is shifting. So if you are rapidly growing our detention system, so we're currently detaining, when Trump came into office, we had about 41,000 people in detention. Now we're nearing 65,000 people. The bill passed over the summer, the One Big Beautiful Bill, has funding to increase that to a capacity of over 100,000 people detained on a given day. That is a huge amount of money. I mean, we're talking billions of dollars, $14 billion a year. So all these additional facilities and communities and companies are going to become involved. They will all feel a sense of dependency on this, so on detention. So if they manage to get through what are sort of, to put it crassly, easy pickings in terms of people without papers, I think there will be this sense of, by many who have become involved and economically dependent, like, well, we need this. This is fueling our business, our community, our households. There could be more willingness to shift laws in ways that draw more people in, right? So we are seeing talk now of moves to evaluate people who are naturalized citizens who weren't born in the United States and go back and look at their citizenship applications and see if there was anything that could be found to be false and revoking that citizenship. That could create new populations. We're talking about reviewing all green card holders. We are talking about shifting laws so that if people are deemed terrorists, their citizenship could be revoked and they could be deported, right? So it's ways that until recently I thought were pretty dystopian, conspiracy theory-ish, that are actually being openly talked about now by some policymakers. And so there's a lot of danger there of people become dependent. They're more willing to kind of shift moral thinking around who can be detained and deported to kind of feed the machine of detention and deportation. You also see some people are being deported fairly quickly, but you also see people detained for months, for years, extended periods of time, especially those who are fighting their deportation because they likely have a solid case. And so those people get caught in then this chaotic system of kind of a no man's land of detention, right? And the people detaining them are making money on every night that they are in detention.
Yeah. So before turning to what the potential solutions might be, let's talk for a moment about what the experience of being inside a detention center is. And I know your work focuses on different people inside these facilities, but one imagines that the impact on children may be particularly traumatic. Give us a sense of what it is to be inside a detention.
Yeah, I mean, just in general, for all people detained, it is generally an abysmal experience. And there are supposedly a set of national detention standards that are modeled after carceral facilities of certain standards that the detention facilities are supposed to adhere to in terms of, food that is provided, medical care that's available, detainee rights in facilities, et cetera, right? There is also an inspections process that facilities are supposed to go through to make sure that they're adhering to standards. Now, what we have seen for years is that facilities state that they're following these standards, and inspections are often passed with flying colors. But any independent agency or non-ICE agency doing these inspections finds the opposite or finds multiple violations. And so what we do in the book is we really look into what happens in these inspections, and we find that they're largely a sham, right? Inspections are announced ahead of time. They are, a lot of detainees tell, when the inspectors came, I actually got a decent meal. There is time to put people with serious medical conditions that are not being treated properly, often in solitary confinement or out of view of inspectors. Detainees are supposed to be given an opportunity to speak to inspectors in a private setting, but they are not. It's in front of the officials who can later punish them if they say something negative. Now we even see that appearance of inspection is being dismantled. The current Trump administration have said to facilities, we will not inspect you nearly as much, or just consider that your own internal inspections processes are good enough for us. The offices in the Department of Homeland Security that were previously in charge of looking at detainee complaints or possible rights violations have been defunded, right? So as weak as the mechanisms that existed were to try to have decent conditions for detainees, those are currently being dismantled. So what that means for detainees in facilities is that they are often hungry, they are often sick, right? They don't have access to communication or to legal assistance. And so they're pretty miserable, right? And what we talk about in the book is that this comes about because the way to make money from these companies is to give the least amount that you can, right? For food companies, we say bad food is the business model, right? Because the customer that the company is serving is not the detainee eating the food. It is the person paying their contract who wants to pay as little as possible, right? So the less food that they give somebody, the more money that they make, right? Or the poorer the quality. So detainees talk about eating, they have food both poor in quantity and poor in quality, right? There are frequent reports of detainees being served rotten food with bugs in it, things that's called meat, but is more like some type of congealed sauce. Just really disgusting tales of what the food is, right? There are recent reports of people really just not getting near enough food to even maintain a weight, right? People are rapidly losing weight. I mean, and we can say the same thing for medical care. In the book, we talk about how cost containment is a phrase that you often hear in medical contracts and bidding documents, even for the public, ICE's public health agency. Really, they're trying to control their costs and give as little medical care as they can get away with. What we see is that the detainee death rate is very alarming. I think we've had somewhere around at least 15 deaths just since January. I mean, and deaths in detention are not infrequent, right? This is not just a new thing. However, the rate of detainee death is skyrocketing right now because of kind of the lack of quality. Detainees are hungry. They're sick. They just want to do whatever they can to ameliorate the conditions of their detention. So they often turn to in-store stores called commissaries. The same things in the carceral system, right? The exact same companies, products. And so they try to buy items, often food or things like ramen, just basic food to supplement the little that they're given by the company, or over-the-counter medications, a change of clothes, a sweatshirt because they're cold, things like that. And we find in some comparative studies that we did that detainees routinely pay 4 to 7 times more when they buy it at a commissary as if it would be purchased in like a Target or a Walmart or something like that. So they're getting ripped off, right? And the commissary companies are making a lot of money. Then detainees, they need money for the commissaries. And some people come in with money, or they have family members who can put money into their accounts, their commissary accounts, but those who don't are desperate. And so they often participate in labor work programs in the facilities. In these work programs, they're called voluntary labor programs. The going rate is $1 a day, which for an 8-hour shift, which works out to about 12 cents an hour. And so they're doing tasks in these labor programs that are essential to the running of the facility. So the facility operators are also saving huge on labor costs by not even having to pay minimum wage. So you see this massive system of how money is being pulled from detainees. When we are looking at the experiences of families and children, it is even more alarming. There are laws in place that are supposed to protect families and minors, but we see in terms of education and being able to wear their own clothes and getting outdoor time, but we routinely see violations of these. So for children, it is traumatizing. It can leave just lifelong marks in terms of the trauma that is caused by being detained.
So alarming conditions, are we able to contextualize them globally? Or I'm thinking about European detention centers. Are there differences? Is it the same system just on a global scale? Is there something that differentiates what's happening in U.S. facilities?
Detention is growing around the world. It's becoming an increasingly popular and normalized response to undocumented immigration, which is growing around the world because of the great inequalities around the world. I think that it's fair to say that the United States is exporting the idea of detention. And a lot of the same companies involved in detention in the United States are becoming involved elsewhere, though many places have their own kind of privatized carceral industries. I think that the United States has the largest detention system in the world by far. I think around the world conditions really vary. I would say generally in Europe, facilities are not nearly as bad as in the United States, but there are exceptions to that. But people studying detention around the world, there are a lot of comparisons to be drawn. And one thing that I think we are really exporting to the world that perhaps was not there to the extent that it is in the United States is this sense that detention can become a way to make money, right? And there are more and more private companies being involved with kind of those cascading effects in terms of webs of dependencies and detainee experiences.
We've discussed the issue sort of regionally, nationally, globally. Now I'd like to just sort of hone in a little bit on Stony Brook University and your role as a faculty member teaching. You've been the recipient of a series of teaching awards in recent years. I think our students deeply appreciate your efforts to convey big ideas about systems and systematic change and system perpetuation. Can you talk a little bit about how you take these huge ideas and issues and translate them into your work in the classroom?
I love teaching for the opportunity to translate things that I'm studying, that I'm interested in, into the classroom. I mean, I learned a long time ago that it's really, you can tell students kind of what is going on in the world, but if they don't have the background and the context to understand why and how we got there, they don't really have the tools to perform their own analysis, to really understand, to kind of think creatively about solutions. So no matter what I'm teaching, I go back in history and kind of look at factors that led us here, look at the similar things that happened in the past, and kind of trace things to the present day. And I really try to connect things to what is going on, in the present day. So students can look at a current news item and, we'll take it apart. We'll say, well, what have we learned about this to help us understand this current event? And then really dive into the specifics. Right now I'm teaching one of my favorite classes to teach, which is Immigration, Borders, and Identities in the Americas. It's a 300 level class. And so, we break it into 3 sections where we really go back and look at the colonial histories of the Americas from the days of colonization to the present day, and look at different forms of foreign intervention in the Americas, economic, political, military, and trace that forward to things that are currently driving people to migrate today. Right. And so students really see wow, what's happening now in terms of foreign intervention is really similar to what happened in, the 1700s. So they can start to make those connections. Right. And then we trace it. The second part of the course, we're tracing people's journeys of migration, either into the Americas or out of the Americas, see what shapes those journeys, see how, in the case of migrants coming to the U.S., how national policies from sending countries, as well as United States policies, shape those migration decisions and journeys. And then we look at what happens at U.S. borders and then after migration, and try to contextualize those in terms of economic and political systems and consequences.
This is really big sort of cultural, political, economic geography.
Yes, absolutely. I am a political geographer, so I always pull that in.
All right, Nancy, a political geographer. Tell us what that means within the larger framing of academia, and how you came to that field, what your journey was into this field.
Well, I think when people think of geography, they think of maps and having to learn country names and bodies of water and things like that. That is part of geography, but geography as an academic field is really interested in studying space and movement through space, and how people inhabit space. And as a political geographer, I'm very interested in political borders and kind of how those are made, what those mean, how those change, and the movement of people and things across political borders. So that's really where migration falls for me. I came to geography not very traditionally, where I got my undergraduate degree at the University of Virginia. They didn't have geography, so I didn't really know what it was. And when I was looking, I wanted to go back to graduate school. I took 10 years off in between undergrad and graduate school, and I did a bunch of different things. I traveled. I was a raft and kayak guide, an outdoor guide in different places around the world. And I had been working guiding in Ecuador, and I noticed that a lot of people were talking about, this was in the late 1990s, we're talking about, I am about to migrate to the United States, or I am leaving for Spain. I can't make it here anymore. So I was became really interested in what was happening and wanted to look at that. So that kind of spurred me to go back to graduate school. And when I was talking with friends in graduate school about what I wanted to do, somebody said, well, you should check out geography. And I was like, geography? What is that? And that's really how I got into it. And I started looking at programs, and indeed, I found people looking at migration, asking a lot of the same questions that I wanted to ask. And there it started.
So geography is a fascinating field right now because there's the sort of cultural geography side of things, and it seems to not have the greatest alignment with the more sort of scientific kind of big data kind of geography that another group of scholars work on. Is there? Am I imagining a divide in the field?
There is a divide in the field. I think, within geography, there are kind of a lot of different areas that are under that umbrella. I mean, there's kind of cultural, political, social, human geography, we say. And then there's more physical geography, so geomorphology and hydrology. And then there's now this emerging like GIS science and big data, right? So there are a lot of different areas. At Stony Brook, there are some geographers, but they're within the geosciences department. So there are areas where people intersect in those work, but I think within the larger field of geography, that's kind of a long-standing conundrum of these very kind of different fields.
Well, that really helps. Thanks very much. All right. Thanks again so much, Nancy, for joining us. Immigration Detention Inc., The Big Business of Locking Up Migrants, is available from Pluto Press. Thanks for listening to the Difference You Make podcast. Subscribe on Spotify and tune in to hear more ideas that matter.